All right, let's get into these parenting
Yes,
styles.
let's.
So the parenting styles, there's 4 different ones,
Yes.
and they're on 2 dimensions from demandingness and responsiveness.
Yep.
So let's start with authoritarian.
So rigid rules with no expectation. Children must obey without question. So do as I say, and you might not be exactly all of them. You might be a mix of a few. And they value order and tradition over individual emotions or expression. And that's a really important one because a lot of people have been brought up in religions and, come from other countries and stuff like that. So that's a really big thing. Berating their children for poor decisions. And children raised with the authoritarian parents as they get older often act fearful, associate obedience with love and success. So that's quite an interesting one. Display aggressive behaviour towards others, lower self-esteem and struggle with self-control. So, yeah, it's not a great one, but a lot of people fit into that with our generations, especially men, sort of in their 50s and stuff like that. Not all men, but they were brought up like that, like 100%. So they're finding it hard as parents to, why aren't my kids doing that, Yeah.
The main feature that I found looking at that was the one-way mode of communication, which I thought was quite important. Like the kid has no say.
At all.
But do you think parents think it's working because they get short-term compliance? And
that's what my oldest daughter was. So I was my oldest daughter. So my mum was that really gentle, kind, no expectations, not in a negative way, but just a really, thank the Lord I had her. But my dad was 100% like this, but I never had a voice. And if I had a voice, I would have known about it, So, yeah, absolutely that. And also my husband, that's what he was brought up with too. So it was like we just did what we were told.
Yeah. I was thinking we could go through some different ages, so like 3, 10, 15.
Yep.
And sort of, I've got a few examples, few scenarios, and we can sort of, you can sort of give me the parent response.
Yeah, sure.
For the authoritarian one, so as a 3-year-old, so the child is playing with their toys and refuses to stop when it's time for dinner. Now, as an authoritarian parent, what would the response be?
Oh my gosh. That could be, it's like corporal punishment. It would be absolutely no space to let them stop playing or go and have that conversation or like give them 5 minutes going up to them. It's just like gets back to the do as I say, absolutely get up. And that would probably be massive consequences pretty quickly and smacking.
And so then the child unconsciously learns that their feelings are
absolutely
unimportant.
Absolutely. Don't feel safe.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing, over all these months of studying is that word safe. And I think, gosh, that's such an important word. But they just don't feel safe.
And it's conditional, isn't it? Like if I comply, then I'll have love. Yeah. And there's that model of love then transfers into the adult life.
Yeah, people pleaser, all of the things that I was. Yeah.
Now we'll go a little bit older, 10-year-old. Yes. So child brings home a report card with a bad grade.
Oh.
What's the response?
Oh, again, they would be consequences. And they would have known and they would have been frightened. And I can share a story. Like that used to happen with me often because I had ADD and I used to be so fearful of coming home. I remember one time I wouldn't come home.
Can you explain ADD as well?
Oh, sorry, attention deficit disorder. So again, it's quite the hype conversation at the moment, but I had it my whole life, but it's not something that was diagnosed. So attention deficit. So our brains are neurodiverse, so we are really awesome at specific things, but really don't like sitting at school reading books. So for me, it was always Donna's so lovely, but talks too much, And I just remember you just zone out. So I used to, really struggle. Not really struggle, but just not get good grades. But my dad expected good grades. And I was always just so fearful of, I wouldn't come home. And, he just, everything that if I wasn't perfect, I would get in trouble.
And that impacted your relationship
because,
lose connection, and there's probably a lot of reasons why kids get certain grades, but then they feel like they can't explain it to them because it's a one-way mode of communication. Right. So it's like it's outcome. Is it outcome based?
Absolutely, yeah. And the other thing is that parents that are in that state, and I was there with the traditional way, but it was more fear rather than want, is the fear of the what if. Like, what do you mean you're not going to pass school or you're not going to, let's just drop all of that and just like be connected with your child and see what they're good at and encourage them rather than you've got to get these grades. And for me, I couldn't get those grades. I couldn't get those grades. I was really good at piano. I did high-level piano and he was okay with that. But, yeah, it's perfection that cannot be achieved, and every child has different things that they excel at. And authoritarian parents just don't – they just want them to be perfect at everything.
Is there a massive reason why parents parent in that way? Is it often from their own generational?
Yeah. Any type of parenting is generational. Like it's actually not their fault. And like I talk about my dad and that way, and you know we've done lots of counselling together, and you know I forgive and all of that stuff. But his is all generational trauma and fear. These sort of styles of parenting, particularly even like helicopter parenting, there's all these new terms. It's all from love. My dad absolutely adored me, but it's out of fear. You've got to be perfect. You've got to do that. Otherwise, you're going to fail at life, you know. And so all of these are all a little bit fear-based, except for authoritative.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right, 15-year-old teenager comes home past curfew.
I never did it because I was too frightened. Yeah.
But
absolutely. Yeah. If I did, oh my gosh. Well, the thing is, usually, again, parents like that have no regulation with anger. It's so they're so triggered. So I would have just copped it.
Is anger a massive component of authoritarian because that spills out from a lack of emotional regulation?
Yeah, and again, it's the trigger. It's just a trigger. It's like the amygdala. It's like a fear. You know, as soon as they fear that they haven't got control, they just lose it, and and then that's that little. You just go, oh, okay, then, because it's the fear based.
Yeah. Okay.
You know? Yeah.
So I just want to highlight the impact that this is going to have over the kid long term for anyone listening, and potentially if you feel like you've been parented this way, like why almost connect the dots a little bit for people. So I looked at a lot of research and I was really surprised at kids who were parented this way. Like you would think like higher academic achievement, but lower academic achievement, less social competence, less emotional regulation, even though the parent's so involved, wanting so much.
Other way, opposite.
Yeah.
It's crazy, isn't it? And the thing is, for me, again, on reflection, I left home at 17. I couldn't wait to get out of there, and on reflection, that's why, because he had such control of me. But these days, kids can't shift out of home. Like, no one can afford to really. So if you're in that situation and you're listening to this, like, it would be really hard. It would be really hard to try and find your authentic self and not get more and more depressed and down, being controlled like that.
And do you feel like people fall back into those habits and those traps if they're in that home?
Oh, yeah.
Because it's hard to, like, get a fresh start.
You can't be yourself. Yeah. And you can't figure out who you are. And so it can be really dangerous because unless you can stand up to that person, which, again, it took me up until my late 30s, you need a lot of support counselling-wise to be able to stand up to a parent that does that. It's not going to be great for you.
So how can we get parents to break this cycle?
So if we talk about my dad, that cycle didn't start getting changed till my 30s when I really started to understand the damage and that it was his issues and stuff like that. And it's like an explanation. One of the psychologists said it's an explanation, not an excuse. Because I always kind of excused his behaviour because of his trauma. But she's like, it's an explanation, not an excuse. And so that was in my sort of mid-30s. I was like, okay. And it's actually getting strength, however that's going to be, with other people that you trust or another parent or someone, counselling to get the strength to be able to put the boundaries on. Because you're either going to have that person kind of disown you because they don't want to hear it, or they don't want to lose the relationship, so they'll do the work. But really it is understanding that that's what's happened and getting help to figure it out. That's the best way. You can't do it on your own.
What about people who would think that, it's not for me, like, it's not that bad? Because that would be a common thing. It's like, I didn't go through that much trauma.
Sure. That was me. I'd go to the psychologist and tell them a story. I remember one lady I had a tear and she's like, and I'm like, oh, no, it's okay, because I was always like that. I was always like, things could be worse. It took years for me to really understand, And she's like, well, what you've just told me is really sad. And I was like, oh. So it was really not until my 30s when I was getting that sort of counselling that I had other people, because I wasn't talking about it to anyone. Like, I just was living with it, And so when you hear other people or professionals go, oh, that's actually really sad, it makes you go, oh. And so I think the biggest thing for that is how are you? Like, if you are okay, then fine, great. But if sometime in your life, in your 30s or 40s, you start to feel down about it or not yourself, or it's affecting relationships, or I don't know if you've got children or not children, that's when you might think, I might look into that, you know, because it's scary. Like I know a lot of men that just don't want to talk about it, and I've tried because I'm a talker, and they're like, I don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. So, yeah, it's really common, particularly for men, I think, which is sad.